I still remember the exact moment everything went wrong, even though at the time it felt like I was doing everything right. We were sitting on the floor, backs against the bed, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but heavy. The room was dim, lit only by a lamp that made everything feel softer than it really was. She kept fidgeting with the sleeve of her sweater, pulling it over her fingers like she was trying to disappear into it. And then she said it. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly. I think I'm defective. I laughed at first, not because it was funny, God no, but because it didn't make sense, because my brain rejected it before my heart could even process it. What? That's not true, I said quickly, almost cutting her off. You're not defective. She didn't look at me, just stared at the floor like she was waiting for me to say something real. So I did what I thought was right. I leaned closer, softened my voice, and said, "You're perfect." That's what you're supposed to say, right? That's what people say in moments like that. You're perfect. She finally looked at me then, but not in the way I expected. There was something in her eyes I didn't understand, something searching or maybe something breaking. Perfect, she repeated. Yeah, I smiled, trying to make it feel warm, certain. Perfect. There was a pause, a long one, and then she nodded, but it wasn't relief. It wasn't comfort, it was resignation. I didn't realize it then. I thought I had fixed it. I thought I had done what mattered, reassured her, filled the silence with something positive, something safe. But I didn't listen. Not really, because she wasn't asking to be corrected. She wasn't looking for a compliment. She was trying to show me something fragile and unfinished, and I rushed to wrap it in something shiny and complete. Perfect didn't meet her where she was. It erased her. Weeks later, I started noticing the distance, the way she stopped opening up, the way her sentences got shorter, safer, like she was editing herself before I even had the chance to hear her. And one night I asked her why. She hesitated, then said something I'll never forget. When I told you I felt defective, I wasn't asking you to fix me. I just wanted you to understand why I feel that way. That hit harder than anything, because in that moment, I realized I hadn't loved her vulnerability. I had tried to overwrite it. I had taken something raw and honest and replaced it with something easier for me to handle. And maybe that's what hurt her the most. Not that I said the wrong thing, but that I didn't stay in the truth with her long enough to actually see her. Now, I think about that word all the time. Perfect, how it sounds so kind but can feel so distant. Because nobody who feels broken needs to be told they're flawless. They need to be told they're understood. And if I could go back to that moment, to that dim room, to her voice barely holding itself together, I wouldn't try to fix it. I'd sit beside her in the silence, and I'd say, "Tell me why you feel that way." Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can give someone isn't the wrong answer. It's the right answer to the wrong question. The worst part is I thought I saved her. That's the lie I keep replaying in my head. The version of the story where I was kind, where I said the right thing, where I showed up the way people are supposed to. But every time I go back to that moment, I see it more clearly. I didn't save her. I silenced her. We were sitting on the floor of her room, shoulders almost touching, but not quite. There was this quiet between us that felt too fragile to move through, like if either of us spoke too loudly, something would shatter. She kept pulling at the thread on her sleeve over and over, like she was trying to undo something that couldn't be undone. And then she said it. I think I'm defective. It didn't sound like a confession. It sounded like a conclusion, like she had already done the math, and this was the answer she didn't want but couldn't escape. I remember feeling this immediate resistance in my chest. Like, no, that's wrong. That can't be true. Not her. So I rushed in. What? No, I said almost too quickly. Why would you even say that? She shrugged, but it wasn't casual. It was the kind of shrug that carries weight. I don't know, it just feels like something's missing or broken, like everyone else got something I didn't. That was the moment I should have stopped. I should have slowed down, sat it with her, let her explain what that defective meant in her world. But I didn't, because her pain made me uncomfortable. Because I wanted to fix it. Because I thought love meant replacing darkness with light as fast as possible. So I said it. You're not defective, I told her softly. You're perfect. But I even smiled. Like that would make it land better. Like warmth could substitute for understanding. You're perfect. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and there was something in her eyes I didn't recognize at the time. It wasn't relief, it wasn't gratitude, it was hesitation. Perfect, she asked. Yeah, I said, nodding like I was absolutely sure. There's nothing wrong with you. She held my gaze for a second longer, like she was searching for something deeper behind my words. And when she didn't find it, she just nodded. Okay, she whispered. And that was it. Conversation over. I thought I had help. I thought I had pulled her out of whatever dark place she was in. I remember feeling almost proud of how gently I handled it. But after that night, something changed. It was subtle at first. She still talked, still laughed, still showed up, but the depth, the rawness, started to disappear. It was like she built this invisible filter between what she felt and what she allowed me to see. Her sentences got shorter, safer. Whenever things got close to something real, she'd pivot, make a joke, change the subject. At first, I told myself she was doing better, that maybe she didn't feel defective anymore. But deep down, I knew. She just stopped telling me. Weeks later, it finally came out. We were walking, not really going anywhere, just moving because standing still felt heavier. I had been feeling the distance for a while, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. Did I do something? I asked. She didn't answer right away, just kept walking, hands tucked into her sleeves. Do you remember that night? She said eventually. When I told you I felt defective, my stomach tightened. Yeah, of course. She nodded slowly. When I said that, I wasn't asking you to fix it. I stayed quiet. I wasn't asking you to tell me I was perfect either. She continued. I just wanted you to understand why I feel that way. There it was. Simple, honest, devastating. I thought I was helping, I said, and even to me it sounded weak. I know, she replied gently. That's kind of the problem. I didn't understand at first. What do you mean? She stopped walking then, turning to face me. When you said I was perfected, it felt like you weren't really listening, she said. Like you skipped over everything I was trying to show you and just replaced it with something nicer. I felt that in my chest. I wasn't trying to ignore it, I said. I know you weren't trying, she said, but it still felt like there wasn't space for me to be anything other than okay with you. That's when it hit me. She didn't feel comforted by perfect. She felt erased by it, because as if she was perfect, then what was she supposed to do with all the parts of her that didn't feel that way? Where was she supposed to put the doubt, the insecurity, the quiet fear that something inside her wasn't right? I hadn't taken that weight from her. I had just made it harder for her to share it. And maybe the worst part is I thought love meant protecting someone from their pain. But she didn't need protection. She needed presence. If I could go back to that moment, I wouldn't rush to fill the silence. I wouldn't try to rewrite what she felt. I'd let it be messy, uncomfortable, real. I'd sit beside her and say, tell me what makes you feel that way. Because now I understand something I didn't then. Sometimes when someone shows you their brokenness, they're not asking you to fix it. They're asking you not to look away. The first time she said it, it didn't sound dramatic or attention-seeking or even particularly sad. It sounded certain. That's what stayed with me. Not the words themselves, but the quiet certainty behind them, like she had already argued with herself 100 times and lost every single one. We were sitting close enough that our shoulders brushed every now and then, but neither of us acknowledged it. The room was dim, the kind of dim that makes everything feel more honest than it is. She had her knees pulled in, sleeves covering half her hands, fingers fidgeting with the fabric like she was trying to hold herself together without letting it show. She had been quieter than usual that night. Not distant exactly, just careful. Like every word she spoke had to pass through some invisible filter before it reached me. I noticed it, but I didn't question it. I told myself she was just tired or distracted or having one of those days people don't talk about. But then the silence stretched too long, and I could feel something sitting inside it, waiting. I'm defective. She didn't look at me when she said it, just kept her eyes fixed on the floor like the words belonged there more than they belonged in the air between us. At first, I thought I heard her wrong. What? I asked, leaning slightly closer, unsure if I was supposed to take it seriously or not. She exhaled slowly, almost like she regretted saying it out loud, but couldn't take it back now that existed. I don't know, she said, her voice soft but steady. I just feel like something's wrong with me. There was no self-pity in it, no attempt to make it sound poetic or deep. If anything, she sounded tired, like she was explaining something obvious that I just hadn't noticed yet. I felt this immediate urge to interrupt, to correct her, to shut the idea down before it had a chance to settle. Because in my mind, it was absurd. She wasn't broken. She wasn't missing anything. If anything, she was the most put together person I knew. But I didn't say anything yet. Not because I was being thoughtful, but because I didn't know which version of reassurance would land best. She finally glanced at me just for a second, and there was something fragile in her expression. Not quite sadness, not quite fear, something in between. Like she was bracing herself for my reaction. I mean it, she added quietly, it's not just a bad day or whatever. It's like everyone else knows how to be a person, and I'm just pretending. And one day they're all going to notice. That landed heavier. I could feel it now. This wasn't about a single insecurity or a passing thought. This was something deeper, something that had been sitting with her for a long time, growing in the background. She pulled at her sleeve again, tighter this time, until her fingers disappeared completely. Do you ever feel that way? She asked, almost hesitantly, like she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. And that question that was the moment she let me in. Not fully, not completely, but enough. Enough to see that this wasn't just a statement. It was an opening, a risk. She wasn't just telling me she felt defective. She was showing me the part of her that believed it. I should have recognized how much that took, how carefully she chose that moment, that wording, that tone. How many times she probably held it back before finally letting it slip out. Because people don't just say things like that. Not unless they're hoping, quietly, desperately, that someone will understand. But understanding requires patience. It requires sitting in someone else's uncertainty without trying to clean it up. And in that moment, I didn't realize how delicate it was. I didn't see that she wasn't asking for an answer yet. She was asking to be seen inside the question. I'm defective. The words lingered in the air, heavier than they had any right to be, as if the room itself had absorbed them. And I remember thinking, this is where I'm supposed to say something that fixes it. Something kind, something certain, something that makes her stop feeling this way. I didn't realize then that this was the moment that would decide everything. I didn't even think before I said it. That's the part that bothers me now. The speed of it, the reflex, like her words barely had time to settle in the air before I reached out and tried to replace them with something cleaner, something easier to hold. You're perfect. It came out soft, certain, almost rehearsed. The kind of line people say when they care, when they want to comfort, when they believe, at least in that moment, that kindness alone can undo something complicated. She had just said, I'm defective. And instead of stepping into what that meant, I stepped over it. I remember leaning a little closer as I said it, lowering my voice like that would make it feel more sincere, like the tone could carry the weight the words themselves couldn't. You're perfect, I repeated, slower this time, as if giving it more space would make it more true for her. In my mind, it made complete sense. It felt right. She was sitting there, small and unsure, and questioning something about herself that, to me, didn't exist. So, of course, the answer was to contradict it, to reassure her, to remind her of what I saw instead, That's what you do when someone you care about is hurting, right? You give them something better than what they're feeling. You replace defective with perfect. I even smiled a little, not because I was dismissing her, but because I thought warmth would help it land. I thought if I looked at her like she was okay, more than okay, then maybe she'd start to believe it too. For a second, I expected something to shift. Relief maybe, a small laugh, even a quiet thanks. Something that would tell me I had reached her. But instead, she just looked at me, really looked at me. There was a pause, and it stretched longer than I expected, long enough for the confidence I had in those two words to start thinning. Perfect, she asked. It wasn't challenging. It wasn't sarcastic. It was searching, like she was turning the word over in her mind, trying to figure out where it fit, or if it fit at all. Yeah, I said quickly, nodding like there was no room for doubt. There's nothing wrong with you. I thought certainty would help. I thought if I sounded sure enough, it would anchor her, pull her out of whatever spiral she was in. But now, looking back, I can hear it, the way I didn't leave any space in that answer. No room for her to disagree. No room for her to explain. Just a full stop where there should have been a door. She held my gaze for a moment longer, and there was something in her eyes I didn't understand at the time. Something quiet and complicated, like a thought she decided not to finish. And then she nodded. Okay, that was it. No argument, no relief, just acceptance. But not the kind I thought I was giving her. It wasn't coquet. I feel better. Coquet, I won't go there with you. I didn't see it then. All I saw was that she didn't push back. That she didn't keep insisting she was defective. I took her silence as agreement, her stillness as comfort. I thought I had done what mattered, because from the outside it looked right. The words sounded right. If someone overheard that moment, they'd probably think it was kind, maybe even meaningful. A girl says she feels broken, and someone tells her she's perfect. That's the script. That's what it's supposed to look like. But what I didn't understand was that I had answered a question she wasn't asking. She didn't need a verdict on her worth. She needed someone to sit with the parts of her that didn't make sense yet. And instead, I handed her a conclusion. You're perfect, clean, simple, final. There's something almost careless about how easy it was to say, how quickly I reached for it, like it was the safest option, the most loving one. But easy isn't always honest, and simple isn't always kind. Because when someone is standing in front of you, trying to show you the parts of themselves they don't understand, telling them they're perfect doesn't always feel like acceptance. Sometimes it feels like being misunderstood in the most beautiful way possible. And I think that's why she didn't argue. Not because she believed me, but because she realized in that moment that I wasn't really hearing her. I was hearing something easier and answering that instead. It's strange how a moment can feel so small while you're inside it and then grow heavier every time you revisit it. Nothing about that night looked dramatic from the outside. No raised voices, no tears, no obvious breaking point. Just two people sitting too close, pretend they weren't affecting each other in a room that felt quieter than it should have been. But underneath that quiet, everything was loud. I could feel it in the way she held herself. Like if she loosened her grip even slightly, something inside her would spill out and she wouldn't be able to gather it again. Her shoulders were tense, her fingers restless, her breathing just a little too measured. And when she said it, I'm defective, it didn't just land between us. It settled into everything. The air shifted. The silence changed shape. Even the space between us felt different, like it had weight now. I remember the exact second after she said it. That pause, that fragile, suspended moment where nothing had been answered yet, where everything was still open and uncertain. That was the real moment, not what I said after, not how the conversation ended, but that space right there where she had just shown me something raw, something unpolished and unfinished, and was waiting, whether she realized it or not, to see what I would do with it. There was vulnerability in the way she said it, but it wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. It was quiet, controlled, almost hidden beneath the surface, which somehow made it more intense. Because it meant she wasn't used to saying things like that. It meant this wasn't casual. This was something she had carried alone. And now it was here, between us. I could feel my own reaction rising just as quickly. This urgency, this need to respond, to fix, to say something that would stop the weight of her words from sinking any deeper. It wasn't just about her in that moment. It was about me too, about how uncomfortable it felt to see someone I cared about standing so close to something painful and knowing how to pull them away from it. So everything inside me sped up, my thoughts, my heartbeat, the way I leaned forward like proximity could solve something understanding hadn't even touched yet. And at the same time, she slowed down. That's what I didn't notice then. While I was rushing to fill the silence, she was sitting inside it, feeling it, letting it exist. There was a tension between those two speeds, mine and hers. Mine trying to resolve the moment, her still living inside it. And right there, in that mismatch, the intensity peaked. Because this wasn't just a conversation. It was a collision between two completely different needs. She needed space. I needed closure. She needed to be heard. I needed to help. And those two things don't always meet the way we think they will. I remember the way she looked at me after I spoke. After I said what I thought would make everything better. It wasn't a dramatic reaction, no visible hurt, no immediate rejection. Just a subtle shift, like something closed quietly behind her eyes. And that quietness that was the loudest part of all, because it meant something had changed, even if I couldn't name it yet. The intensity of that moment didn't come from what was said. It came from what wasn't, from everything she didn't get to explain, from everything I didn't think to ask, from the way two people can be inches apart and still miss each other completely. And the worst part is you don't feel the full weight of it right away. In the moment, it just feels like a conversation. A little serious, maybe a little emotional, but manageable. It's only later, when the distance starts to grow, when the words echo back differently, when you finally understand what was actually being offered to you, that the intensity hits. That's when you realize that moment wasn't small at all. It was a turning point, and you were in it, unaware, saying things you thought were right, while something far more important was quietly slipping past you. Because emotional intensity doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it disguises itself as stillness, as softness, as a single sentence spoken without emphasis. I'm defective. And the way you respond to that, especially in that exact moment, when everything is open and fragile and waiting, doesn't just shape the conversation. It shapes what the other person believes is safe to share with you from that point on. I didn't understand it then, but her saying, I'm defective, didn't start in that room. It didn't even start that week or that month. It started long before me. Layer by layer, moment by moment, built quietly out of things that, on their own, didn't seem big enough to matter. But together they became something she believed. I only began to see it later, in fragments, the way she would mention things casually, like they were just stories, like they didn't carry weight anymore. But they always did. She once told me about how, growing up, she was the easy one. The kid who didn't cause trouble, didn't ask for much, didn't make things harder for anyone. At first, it sounded like a compliment, something parents say with pride, but the way she explained it, it wasn't pride. It was quiet conditioning. No one really checked on me, she said once, almost absent-mindedly, because I was fine. I was always the one who was fine. There was something about the way she said fine that didn't feel like stability. It felt like invisibility. When you're always the one who's okay, you learn quickly that your problems don't have space, that your feelings are optional, secondary, something to manage on your own so you don't disrupt the balance around you. So she learned how to shrink things before they became noticeable, how to process emotions privately, quickly, efficiently, how to present a version of herself that didn't need too much. And over time, that version became the one everyone knew, but not the one she felt like. She told me about friendships that faded the moment she needed something back. About being the person who listens, who supports, who shows up until the roles reverse, and suddenly there's hesitation on the other side. I think I'm just easier to be around when I'm not complicated. She admitted once. That word again, complicated, like depth was a flaw, like having needs made her harder to keep. There were moments she described where she tried to open up, just a little, just enough to test the waters. And the response she got wasn't cruel, not obviously dismissive, but incomplete. People would reassure her quickly, change the subject gently, tell her she was overthinking. And each time that happened, it confirmed something for her. Not that people didn't care, but that there was a limit to how much of her they were willing to hold. So she adjusted again and again until eventually she stopped testing it altogether. What I didn't see in that moment on the floor was that she had already been here before, sitting across from someone trying to put something real into words, hoping just once that it would be received differently, hoping someone wouldn't rush past it, hoping someone would stay. I don't think it's just in my head. She told me another time, her voice quieter than usual. I think there's actually something missing in me, like the part that makes people stay. That wasn't insecurity. That was a conclusion built from experience. Not one big, dramatic heartbreak, but dozens of small moments where she felt unseen, unheard, or just slightly out of sync with everyone else. Moments where she was almost understood, but not quite. And those almost add up. They leave gaps. They create questions that don't get answered, just internalized. What's wrong with me? Why does this keep happening? Why do I feel different, even when I'm trying so hard not to be? By the time she said, I'm defective, to me, it wasn't a random thought. It was the simplest way she could summarize all of that, all the quiet dismissals, all the emotional self-editing, all the times she made herself smaller to fit into spaces that never fully held her. It was the word she chose after running out of better explanations. And maybe the hardest part to accept is this. She didn't expect me to fix it. She didn't even expect me to disagree. What she was really doing in that moment was offering me context, letting me see the story behind the feeling, trusting me with something that had never quite been understood before. And I thought the most important thing was to change how she saw herself. But she wasn't asking for a new label. She was asking if I could understand the one she had already been living with. Because when someone believes they're defective, it's rarely about self-hatred. It's about confusion. It's about trying to make sense of a pattern that keeps repeating without explanation. It's about standing in the middle of your own experiences and realizing you don't know how to interpret them anymore. So you simplify it. You turn it inward. You make it your fault, because at least that gives it structure. At least that gives it a reason. I'm defective. Not because she wanted to believe it, but because after everything she had felt and everything she couldn't explain, it was the only answer that stayed consistent.